the biggest leadership lesson I learned there is when you're in a position where you're in charge of a team, your team does not work for you. You work for your team. And this is like very specifically like first line, second line leadership, whether that's director, VP level. Your job is to make them successful at their job. Therefore, your job is to work to serve them, right? To work for them. And I'll be honest, like that's not when I first became a manager, that's not how I operated. It was like, do this, do this, do this. Like you have to do this because I'm your boss. Now it's like, hey, this is the expectations. These are the standards. What can I do to make sure you meet them? That is like a switch that I went through as a leader, and it made all the difference in the world. And what ended up happening when I started operating that way, my team started winning. So that was like especially when you're growing, we went from like less than 50 people to over 600 people in like 6 years. It was like that. If you're not operating that, if your leaders aren't operating that way, you're going to have like a pretty tough culture, a lot of burnout, because expectations and standards are high in those environments. You've got to be the leader that's helping your people achieve those expectations and standards.
This is Sparta!
Welcome back to Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick. And if this is your first time tuning in, welcome. You are in for a treat. We are a leader-to-leader podcast focusing on inspiration and impact. And today will be no different. Got my new friend, JR Butler, joining me all the way from the East Coast. What's going on, brother?
How we doing, Josh? Thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah, you'll get that Massachusetts accent in there. Everyone, I didn't even have to say you were from the East Coast and get that Boston accent in there.
You can definitely hear it.
That's right. Well, let me give you a brief intro so everyone knows who they're talking to or listening to today, I should say. But JR Butler is a former collegiate hockey stud who transitioned from the ice to a dynamic career in the tech and startup world. As a former chief revenue officer at Pillar, an early leader at Turbonomic, he has a proven track record of scaling companies, which a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this show are trying to do or working on doing. So it's a good conversation to have. Building successful sales models, forging impactful partnerships. And under his leadership, Turbonomic was acquired by the notorious IBM. We'll call him the notorious, but famous IBM, marking a significant milestone in his career. Today, JR leverages his experience and passion for competition as the founder and CEO of Shift Group. Through Shift Group, JR is redefining the career transition experience for former athletes and military veterans. All that to be said, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, man. I'm pumped to talk to you, Josh.
Pumped to talk to you. We've had good conversation in the past. And I know today will be no different. So right away, let's start with that transition because you and I had a similar transition. I playing college football, started going into the professional world. You as a college hockey player going into that professional world. So what was it like going in your transition from athlete to professional?
It was brutal, man. It was like losing a loved one, really no different, right? This thing that was, the thing I thought about every morning when I woke up, every night before I went to bed, what I spent all day with and around. Literally one morning you wake up and it's just gone. I struggled with it really, really bad. I didn't really have a lot of the tools and, mindset to like get through that. My answer to the emotional struggle was, drugs and alcohol, unfortunately, but eventually I found my way and you talked about my path from there. I think my transition was probably made worse by the fact that I'm the oldest of three boys, Josh. When I got out of hockey, my middle brother was the next season he was an All-American NCAA hockey player. A year later, he won the scoring title for college hockey, led the country in scoring, was a Hobie Baker finalist. And then my youngest brother was also going into college hockey at the same time. So like, you know, and you're young, you're immature, there's like resentment and anger and jealousy instead of, you know, pride. Obviously I've gotten over that and realized that I was wrong in that time, but I think that combination of all those things happening at once is what really led me down a dark path, which ultimately though led me to Shift Group. So I'm grateful for that experience.
Yeah, I left the drugs and alcohol part out of your bio, but it's a good and important distinction. And I'm glad you were vulnerable enough to share, because there are a lot of military veterans and a lot of former athletes that follow that same path. And now being graduated, let's say, from that and grown up and figured out some healthy patterns for your life, how are you helping college athletes and or former college athletes and former military veterans avoid those dark pathways that you previously took?
Well, I think like if I was going to describe it in like one sentence, Josh, I would say like candor is kindness. Like we have very blunt conversations with these folks, but prior to that, what we do is we start with introspection, which is hard to do as an athlete, as a soldier. You know, you're supposed to be strong. You know, there's some challenges, but before we do anything about your career, your job, like training, skill training, we make these folks that take a step back and look in the mirror and think about what their personal values are, both what they've shown in the past, but how they want to show up in the future. Then the candor starts coming when we start talking about priorities and goals, right? Especially young people have a little bit of delusion when they enter the real world about how much money they think they can make versus how much they're going to have to work to earn that. So we kind of have those candid conversations like, hey, if salary and comp is important to you, then location is limited, right? Like there's only so many places you can go live initially as an early career person and make a lot of money quickly. Things like work-life balance, like those types of priorities. And then the last piece is we lock in their mindset, right? There's all these factors that have to do with your ability to achieve your goals. Things like, I mean, it sounds so simple, but like having goals, having a vision, having a purpose, having self-confidence, having, you know, getting through the fears. The fears are normal. You're doing something new for the first time ever. You just got to get your arms around those things. So we always start with the person themselves and getting them right mentally and emotionally before we ever start hitting them with like, here's what tech is, here's what healthcare is, here's what, you know, financial services is. We always start with the individual first. And I think that's what's made us really, really successful to date.
You know, what's interesting about it, you say that. Well, there's a lot of interesting, but the one thing that came to mind for me is it's one of the bridges that I cross with people internally, right? So my bridge number 2 is internal, because if we're not right with ourselves, we can't be the best professionally. And you're keying in on that. So from childhood, we're asked, what do we want to be when we grow up? And then that's reinforced in high school. It's like, well, what do you want to go to college for? And then in college, it's reinforced again. What do you want to do when you graduate? What are you going to do with this degree? And it's all the what, the what, the what. And no one ever stops to ask you, hey, JR, who do you want to be when you grow up? And so we're just stuck in this cycle. It's nature and nurture, right? Of providing for building a career, for building professional accolades. Like I know for you from our previous conversation, like professional hockey player, that's what you wanted to be. And when that was ripped away from you because it was the what and not the who, you went down those dark paths.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd take it even a step further, Josh. Like, you know, we can talk about what I went through the last like 6 weeks with my health challenges. But, you know, quick preview, guys, I had 22 incidents of cardiac arrest in 11 days. So one of the things that I came out of that with, Josh, was like this new appreciation, not about the what, but about the why and the how. So it's who, why, how. Like who, why, how has nothing to do with what your job is, like what your title is, right? What your role is. It's about who are you when you show up to that, to your colleagues, your customers, whatever. It's about why you do that and how you do it, right? Like, how am I going to approach my job? I don't care if you're an accountant, a teacher, a salesperson, doesn't matter. But how you do that should be how you define yourself, not what the actual thing is. So I haven't really heard somebody communicate the delusion of what, but you just nailed it on the head. That doesn't really matter to me at all. And it shouldn't matter to you either.
No, exactly. But it's what's bred into our society at this point. And it doesn't matter if you're male or female. They're just talking about what, and not who or why, like you mentioned. And then the how that goes along with that. What should be last? In fact, as we're defining our careers, I know you place people in a lot of different fields, but it's like, what lights you up, right? Or from the inside. What is your God-given gifts that God specifically gave you to give back to the world in a manner that lights you up, that you're really good at and you love doing? And try to think through all those characteristics of a job and then line a job or a position or a title to that, instead of just thinking, oh, I want to be an accountant. Well, why do you want to be an accountant? I want to be a financial planner. Well, why?
Right.
And there might be a really good reason, or it just might be, well, I heard they made a lot of money. And so I know you hear that as you're placing people, but we may have just answered this, but I think it's really important for us to touch on. So you guys have placed over 600 people and you have less than a 5% attrition rate. That's a ridiculous stat. So talk to us more on how you guys are doing that.
I think one is what we just talked about, to your point, but I also think, like, so once they're set, like, emotionally, mentally, with who they are and what's important to them, and, you know, why they want to go do these things, we expose them to multiple career paths, right? Which it's a way for them to kind of check the box on things that, oh, maybe I'll try this. Instead of trying it, it's like, we'll teach you about it and then you can make a decision. So by the time they actually pick a career path, they've heard about 25 different career paths from other former athletes and veterans. That's how our program works, is they actually get to see someone like me who's been in their seat, but also has become an executive. In my case, it was in technology, but they get to hear, like, JR in financial services, JR in, you know, med device or whatever it is. They pick a path and then they have to do like 10 to 20 hours of tactical training in that path. And we tell them this, like, if you're halfway through that training and you're like, this is miserable and I'm not, like, intrigued by this and it's not, like, juicing me up, dude, go back, look at the other careers again, because the way we built our training is like, this is what you're going to be doing for your first 18 months. That's why we picked these concepts to teach you. If you can't spend 10 hours on these concepts, you're not going to be able to spend 18 months on it. So start over, right? And you only wasted a half a day instead of wasted 6 months at a job that you didn't like, and now you're going to another job. So I think
or
that
20 years.
Yeah, or 20 years, or exactly, or a lifetime, right? So I think that's the secret ingredient on the attrition rate. Like, by the time these folks, it's like trial by fire. By the time they're at the end and they're interviewing with customers, they've already gone through the part where they would have quit already.
That's amazing. And that's a great strategy to help them and not have that candor, like you said, because they may have fallen in love with the idea that they want to be a financial services professional, or they may have fallen in love with the idea that they want to sell med devices, but it was more about the money and they hated the actual role.
Totally.
And so the athletes thing seems obvious because you were an athlete, but the military, not so obvious. Why did you guys, or you specifically even, decide to work with both athletes and military transition?
I lived with my grandfather. He lived with us growing up till I was about 16 when he passed away, but he was a veteran. My other grandfather was a vet. I never met him, but he served. And being from Worcester, I had a lot of buddies that enlisted, and they kind of got out from Afghanistan and Iraq around the same time I got out of hockey, and misery loves company, dude. Right. So like we're sitting, I'll never forget this. We're like sitting around a table playing drinking games, all basically saying the same thing, which is like, we're 24 years old, 25 years old. We've already reached the apex. Like these guys went and defended the country. They fought for our freedom. I played in front of a bunch of people, the game that I've loved since I was 2 years old. It's like, it's only downhill from here, right? Like that was kind of the state of the state for all of us. At the same time, what we had done for the last, 8 years in terms of playing sports at that level or serving the country, when you actually took a step back, that experience was very similar in the sense that the characteristics you were forced to develop, the teamwork, the resiliency, the trainability and coachability, the work ethic, all of those things, whether you're in uniform for a college team, a professional team, an Olympic team, or your country, are the parallels are undeniable. So like when I started the company, we started with athletes, but I always was going to do veterans, and because I think the experience is very similar. And if I'm being honest, it's a much bigger opportunity, Josh. There's more veterans entering the job market every year than athletes. And, the government themselves will tell you that they're not doing a great job on that transition. They have a massive, massive underemployment problem, meaning veterans have higher employment rates than general population by like percentages. But when you actually look at the jobs that they're taking jobs that are way underneath their capabilities. And that's the problem we want to go fix.
That's amazing. Well, not only that, there's 22 veterans on average taking their own lives per day.
Exactly.
There's a severe mental health problem that the government is refusing to address. And there's some great charities that we're supporting that are helping address that. But it shouldn't just be like the government, they're using them for their own purposes in the guise of protecting our country. And I'm obviously asserting some of my own personal opinions here, but needless to say, they're fighting for our freedoms. They're paying the ultimate price, some of them, and then they come back, they make it home alive, and they lose their purpose and are taking their own lives. And I know you're big on giving them back that purpose. Is there a different methodology that you utilize or stuff that you do with them for brain health to get them right to go into their next mission, their next career?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be shocked by, the coaches that work with our athletes and veterans, when they do this like mindset assessment, it's almost like a therapy session. Like when you get a kid who's really low on self-confidence, we get a special operator, Josh, right? Navy SEAL, Green Beret, Army Ranger, whatever, who does the mindset assessment. And then you look at their like self-confidence score, and it's like in the 1 percentile, and you're like, you almost have to have like a therapy session with that person. Like, man, what's going on? Like, you are a freaking badass, dude. Like, how are you not feeling really good about what's next, right? And it becomes very, very personal. Just to comment on what you said, I've never said this out loud, but this is how I feel. We solve two problems that I believe big institutions are failing at. I think the academia is failing on the transition, and the government's failing on the transition. And what I tell people is like, if you give a problem to the government to solve, you know what you get back? You get a tax bill back. If you give academia a problem to solve, you know what you get back? You get a book in a library. So like neither of those are actual solutions to anything. So we're going to take it to, the free enterprise, and we're going to build a business to solve this problem because they haven't done it. And it's been there for 50 years on both sides.
Yeah, if not longer.
Yeah.
So aligning your mission, what is the core mission of Shift Group?
To bridge the gap between people in uniform and the civilian business world. That's like very simply put, that's our mission.
Love it. And what's the industries that you're finding the most success for military, ex-college athlete?
The answer is technology, but a lot of that is because of what our focus has been. We're starting to see a lot of success in financial services and healthcare. I don't think that there's an industry that we can't impact positively, but definitely to date has been technology. And obviously there's some positives to that, right? Technology's arguably the fastest growing industry. So that's a good thing. But I'm also, like, even as someone who's worked in it for 17 years, I'm very well aware that it's not for everybody, nor do I think it should be.
It's not for me.
No.
I can tell you that. I'm technologically inept in a lot of areas. I'll even ask my kids some questions at times now. But that being said, it's obviously a booming industry. AI is playing into that now as well. I mean, there's so many opportunities in that space. So what are the skill sets? Because we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this show. What are the skill sets that you believe former athletes, and I know some of the answer on the former athletes in military as well for what I looked for as an employer, but what are some of the skill sets that these people specifically have that employers should be looking at them specifically for?
Well, I think, like, the biggest one, if you're an employer and you're bringing somebody on and it's their first job, I think that athletes and veterans come with a level of coachability and trainability that a normal person might not have. And the reason for that is because as an athlete or somebody who serves in the military, when you first start out, you're bad at it, like, for the most part, right? You got certain people like my brother, who is a God-gifted, naturally talented hockey player. But usually it's more like me, who I had to work my ass off to be good enough to play Division I. So this idea of, like, turning weaknesses into strengths is something that these people are born to do, and they're bred to do, and they've done it already. And that's not something that's going to come across in a resume, and it's certainly not going to be necessarily on a job description. But if you have someone with that growth mindset, there's no cap. There's no ceiling to what those type of people can accomplish. So I think that being one of the critical ones. And I think the second one, just in the world we're in now, 2024, you got a lot of individualism, a lot of, me first type of mindsets, where it's like, I need to take care of number one, which, like, by the way, I understand. But if you're building a company, that's not a good mindset or culture to create. You have to create a culture where the customer obviously is first, but after that, it's the company. Like, you want to get people that can operate when they have to make a decision or they have to take an action. The choice that they're making is with the guardrail that I'm going to make the choice that's the best thing for the company. Then I'm going to think about what's the best thing for the team that I'm on, right? Then lastly, I'm going to think about what's the best thing for me. Where, in today's generation and today's culture and environment, people are doing that math backwards. They're making decisions based off what's best for them. And if somebody played sports at a high level or served our country, they've already proven they can put other people before them, full stop. And that's, dude, I think if you can get those two things in a new hire, Josh, think about it. The world is your oyster at that point.
Yeah. You just made me think of Coach Herb Brooks in the Miracle on Ice. The name on the front of the jersey is a hell of a lot more important than the name on the back.
Love that scene.
But that's what we were taught on teams, right? If you weren't a swimmer or a track star, like you were on a hockey team, you were on a football team, like you or I, the team was always more important than the individual.
Yep.
And in the military, that's always been the case, right? Because if you're just looking out for yourself, you get other people killed. Like, the stakes are way higher. But I'll give the audience even one more thing the reason I looked at former college athletes, in specifically military, is a little something different that I look for. But especially you D1 athletes, this is why I looked at you so seriously and wanted to recruit you. You were used to managing a much busier schedule than the average college student.
100%.
So the average college student may have 2 or 3 classes a day, and they may have to do some studying or work that day, maybe, if they chose to. The college athlete has lifting, practice, team sessions, video sessions, on top of their classes, on top of their schoolwork. Their regimented schedule is so much more, and their responsibility is so much more than the average college student. I already know you can handle the workload. I already know you can handle a busy schedule, and you have high expectations of yourself.
Yep.
So that was one other major reason, other than the ones you mentioned, that I looked at former college athletes.
I also think the last one I'll say is like depth charts, scoreboards, rankings. Like that's par for the course in sports. There's a scoreboard everywhere you go, and there's a depth chart. When you're in the military, you know exactly where you stand compared to your peers. That's a characteristic of business that if you didn't grow up like that can make a lot of people really uncomfortable, right? I even see people posting on LinkedIn like the scoreboard is toxic in sales. It's like, no, it's not. That's the whole point. You know what I mean?
That's if you ever see that, stop following that person immediately, because data is data, and you need data to know if you're winning or losing.
Correct.
Because unless even nonprofits are for profit.
Yes.
Right. So they track their number of donors, they track how much money is coming in. But let's go to the for-profit world, which most of us are in. The numbers are the numbers.
Yep.
Like the data doesn't lie. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. Right. So the data is not toxic. It is what it is. And it gives you indicators to help you predict the future. That's right. Hilarious you brought that up, though, because I've seen that shit as well. And it's so dumb. But yet people put it on the internet as, oh, it must be true. All right, let's switch to some leadership stuff. So you were a part of Turbonomic. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yep.
All right, Turbonomic. You're a key leader there, and you helped scale the company significantly. What are some key leadership or key lessons in leadership that you took away from that big scale before it was acquired?
I think the biggest leadership lesson I learned there is when you're in a position where you're in charge of a team, your team does not work for you. You work for your team. And this is like very specifically like first line, second line leadership, you know, whether that's director, VP level. Your job is to make them successful at their job. Therefore, your job is to work to serve them, right? To work for them. And I'll be honest, like that's not when I first became a manager, that's not how I operated. It was like, do this, do this, do this. Like you have to do this because I'm your boss. Now it's like, hey, this is the expectations. These are the standards. What can I do to make sure you meet them? That's like, that is like a switch that I went through as a leader, and it made all the difference in the world. And, you know, what ended up happening when I started operating that way, my team started winning. So that was like especially when you're growing, you know, we went from like less than 50 people to over 600 people in like 6 years. It was like that. If you're not operating that, if your leaders aren't operating that way, you're going to have like a pretty tough culture, a lot of burnout, because expectations and standards are high in those environments. You've got to be the leader that's helping your people achieve those expectations and standards.
Yep. In fact, one of the first leadership books I was handed when I was, before my entrepreneurial career started, I was a sales manager at Best Buy, and they handed me Servant Leadership. And leadership is a responsibility in servanthood. And that's what it's about. If you're not able to serve, you're not able to lead. So that's 100% agreement. In fact, I'll actually tell a personal story about my financial firm that I sold. I was bringing in a key leader, and she was going to be responsible for holding accountable a lot of other leaders. And the topic, as that became a reality and she came into the business, was it created some friction. The topic was, well, who reports to who? And it kept coming back to this, well, am I reporting to her now or am I reporting to you? I was like, I don't want anyone reporting to me. The visionary is not good at holding people accountable, managing, reporting to. They're great at key relationships, big ideas, casting the vision for the organization. That's what I'm good at. And so this conversation kept coming up as to who's reporting to who, and I got sick of it. And I flipped the whole org chart on its head. And I said, I serve her, she serves you, you serve the advisors, and the advisors serve the clients. And that's who it's about. And all of a sudden, it clicked. And it came from a moment of frustration because I was sick of the conversation of who reports to who.
Right.
But we get trapped in these org charts of like who reports to who and this ego pissing contest. And it's not about that. It's about who serves who.
I'm stealing that, Josh. I love that. That's amazing.
Flip the org chart, brother.
I love that. 100%.
Now, in EOS world, we use accountability chart, and it's far more of a horizontal ladder than a vertical ladder.
Yep.
But I often tell that story when people are getting in their egos and getting in their feelings. It's not about who reports to who. It's not about, because there's positions on that horizontal ladder that could get paid more than others based on what revenue they're driving to the firm. So it's getting the right people in the right seats. We got to let go of our egos in those scenarios. So key leadership lessons now that you've left a big, well, let's say mid-sized company that was acquired by a very big company. And now you're in this position of how long has Shift Group been around now?
A little over 2 years.
So a little over 2 years. So you're in your infancy, but yet doing really big things. What's the next iteration as you've learned these scaling through Turbonomic? What's the next iteration for Shift? How are you thinking about scaling this thing as big as possible?
Yeah, I think of our business. I don't like the term marketplace, but at the end of the day, the way our business model is structured is we have supply of athletes and veterans and demand for companies that want to hire those people. So our next iteration is about growing both sides of that, starting with supply. And the way we're going to do that is by taking the process, the education, the content, this community that we built, and making it relevant for anybody who's worn a uniform at that level at any point in their life. They could still be in that uniform. They could be 20 years out of that uniform. They're going to want to come to Shift Group for free to consume our content, our education, and connect with like-minded individuals. And as we build that supply side, what follows, right? Then the demand will follow. So we want to be the de facto platform for career education and content and development for athletes and veterans, and the de facto platform that a company comes to hire those types of people for any role. That's the future state of our business.
That's awesome. So I want to ask a question that could be pretty tactical, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs and leaders that listen to this show, and you're in that infancy stage, so you can speak to this well. So as you think about that big vision, what's the biggest roadblock for you and your newer business from achieving that big vision?
It's losing focus on where we're making money today, right? Like, and I've made by the way, like the only reason I know this can be a distraction is because I've done it as a CRO. I made the mistake of like, hey, here's the big vision. We're going to go build and focus on this. And the analogy I use, Josh, is like a fire. When you start a fire, initially it's like a little bit of paper, some kindling, maybe you put a match on there to get it going. But if you put a log on too fast, what happens? The fire goes out, right? So when we think about that big vision, that's a build to vision. That's not going to happen overnight. And if it does, we're screwed because we're not going to be making money in that process. So we're going to get there by continuing to add kindling to this nice little flame we have going right now. We're not going to drop a log on it, but we're going to keep adding kindling. And I think if you want to build a really big business, your natural instinct is to go after the logs. That's a dangerous road to go down. You have to be very strategic about the things that you're really focused on. And at the end of the day, like even though I grew up in tech, I was taught from a very young age that the businesses exist to make money, right? Like it's not just growth at all costs. Like it's not like, hey, give me $10 million at the end of the quarter. I'll give you 9 million in revenue and we'll call it a business. That's like, no, dude, you lost $1 million. That's not how it works. Right. So, and by the way, like before the interest rates went up, that's how most businesses operated. Like they were okay with the loss. I'm not okay with that. So we have to build to that vision, and we have to do it with like little pieces at a time. Like, hey, we're doing tech sales. Now we're going to do med device. Now we're going to do wealth management. Now we're going to do this. Now we're going to do that. And like over time, then you can start throwing logs in the fire and that thing's going to blow up.
Yep. It's like pushing that big boulder uphill, right? I use the analogy. I love the fire analogy that you just used because as businesses grow and entrepreneurs do their entrepreneurial thing where they like, see an opportunity here, see an opportunity there, they tend to lose focus on their core. So I use it like the body, like you're a high level athlete as well. If your core is not strong and you neglect your core, an injury pops up somewhere else, or potentially a career ending injury if you really neglect it and go after something big and lose focus on that core. So I've always used the core as an example, but that fire analogy is no pun intended, fire. So good. So let's talk about leading in a competitive environment, because you've been on highly competitive hockey teams and highly competitive tech world. And that tech world is growing as it is more and more competitive every single day. So what advice would you give leaders on staying competitive without losing sight of their core mission?
I think it comes down to like belief and conviction. Like number one is like really truly understanding your unique value proposition, whatever your business is. Like, why is your business unique, different, better, whatever? And then it's about belief and conviction in that. Because if you have that belief and conviction, the way you're going to operate in a conversation is in a way where you don't want to force your ideas on somebody. You want them to kind of see the world the way you do. And if you have belief and conviction in the way you see the world, then approaching those conversations with that belief and conviction is really about like just understanding. I don't understand. How come you see it? Like the company Turbo, we solved the problem very uniquely. That was the enterprise IT teams have solved the same way for 50 years since IT existed. And we went into a market where they were looking for a very specific tool. And our whole thesis was like, that's a waste of money. Buying a monitoring tool is a waste of money. So what we had to do, because we believed in our solution so much, is we had to understand, why do you want to buy that? Like what about that? What is the outcome that you're trying to drive when you make an investment in that type of solution or that type of product or that type of company? And what happens in that process is they start to see the world the way you do. So I think the short answer is belief and conviction, and like approaching every conversation, not with like the idea that I'm going to convince someone. I'm going to try to understand how this person thinks, seek to understand. I think with belief and conviction and curiosity, you can do anything you want to do and build anything you want to build.
Well, seek to understand, then be understood. That's one of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yep.
It's one of the greatest leadership principles of all time. And so many people are first seeking themselves being understood versus understanding the person on the other side of the table.
Totally.
And that's just a problem. So thinking through, I want to go back actually to, your health scare and how that's, because you're a young dude.
Yes.
And that's a major thing that you had to overcome with, was it 22 cardiac arrests in 11 days? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So you're a young, healthy dude, and that happens. What's the mindset now? I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but that's a big health scare at a young age. How has that shifted things for you?
I mean, and you said your audience is a lot of entrepreneurs, and you are. So I think you'll understand this is like, you wake up it's always on your mind, your business and what you're building. But I'm a husband, I'm a father. I have a 17-month-old, and I have big family and lots of friends. And I think for a long time, you go through the motions of life, and like whatever's like that number one kind of stressor priority for you is always in the back of your head. And I think the experience I went through made me appreciate like that's still going to be there when I'm done doing what I'm doing right now, which is talking to you, or when I get home, being with my son, being at dinner with my wife tonight for her birthday. And I guess like if I was going to describe like the biggest takeaway I had from dying 22 times, it was like, you have to be where your feet are all the time, no matter what. And you got to be all in where you are. And that means when I'm at work, dude, I am all in. I'm dialed in. As soon as I leave here, as soon as I get home, I am all in with my wife. I'm all in with my son. When I go away, like I did last weekend with a bunch of buddies for a charity tournament, I am all there with my buddies. Like, I'm enjoying it. I'm present in that experience because I don't know, like our ferry could have sunk on the way home from Nantucket and I could have died. So like, what would be the biggest regret is that was I really there? Did I really get the most out of that experience or didn't I? So I'm very like myopically focused now on like being where I am all the time, no matter what.
So you've been given this blessing really of perspective, but it's so fresh. I think that some people get this blessing and then they, forget it because they get trapped, right? And doing. How are you going to remember this and make sure that it stays a blessing the rest of your life?
I think I have like a gratefulness practice. Like I just write down 3 things I'm grateful for every day. And now since this happened, the first thing I write, and I never wrote this before, Josh, ever. And like you said, I'm 39 with a pacemaker. That's not normal. The first thing I write every morning is I am grateful to be alive. Like I woke up, I'm on the right side of 6 feet. This is a great day. Everything, I'm playing with the house's money now, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to continue to, you have to remind yourself daily, because it is very easy to get lost in the sauce, right? So that for now, that's my plan, is just to continue to remind myself, like, dude, you almost died a lot. Like, make sure you're just appreciate that you woke up every morning.
So I would just urge you to continue that practice, because I have some good friends that started this company, The Motion of Gratitude, Matthew and Shannon Missimer, and they've taught me the science behind it and how gratitude actually rewires the brain. And it's not just scientific, it's also biblical. Gratitude literally rewires your brain in such a positive manner that it should be a practice that we all express. So you do 3 wins in the morning, or I'm sorry, 3 gratitudes in the morning.
Yeah,
I do. I picked this up from The Gap and the Gain by Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. I write 3 wins at the end of each evening. So as I'm laying in bed, I have a journal that sits right next to my bed. Some days it's 4 wins. I think I probably had a day of 5 or 6 wins, but at least 3 wins each day. And so I've given this practice out a lot to people, because we're constantly living in the gap, which is like we're looking at social media and we're thinking about our goals, and it's all so far away. And we forget all the either blessings and gratitude or the wins that we stacked up that day. For instance, yesterday I had 2 business wins. My 3rd win was coaching my 7-year-old son's flag football team to a victory, right? Yeah. So it's not all business. It could be that, hey, I really didn't want to work out this morning and I did it anyhow.
Yep.
That's a win.
That's a huge win.
Right? So these are things that we track, and now I'm so excited. So now we're towards the end of October. I got just a couple months to go to look at this on December 31st and just thumb through my 2024 wins, count them up, see what I counted as a win at the beginning of the year, see what I'm counting as wins at the end of the year, just kind of assess that and just see how far I've come over just a 1-year period.
That's awesome.
And you can do the same thing with your gratitudes as well.
Yeah. I'm taking the 3-win thing. I like that. I'll go right underneath the gratitude in the morning. I'll do the wins at night. I love
Got
that.
your morning book and your evening book. I love it.
Yep.
All right. So we talked about company vision. I would say the one question that I had, which you already answered, which is what's one daily habit that keeps you grounded? Boom, 3 gratitudes in the morning. Who's been the most influential person in your life?
My dad, for sure. My dad, 100%.
What's made him that?
He lost his dad at 16 years old, which I cannot even imagine. But you know, he grew up in a very, very tough household. You know, 5 kids, no dad. His mother, my grandmother, is now recovered, but she was an alcoholic. She got sober 6 months before I was born, but prior to their teenage and, you know, middle school age, she was not sober. And against all odds, he built like a really, really great life, couple really great businesses. He gave me and my brothers everything that we could ever imagine. We all got to play college hockey. We all got to go to college. We all got to apply to college, right, Josh? Like I'm the first person in my family, both sides, cousins, aunts, uncles included, to ever apply to college. Forget about go to it, right? That type of generational shift to me takes a really strong human being. And I just admire the shit out of him big time.
That's awesome. I was thinking about as you're saying that with your dad, he raised not only 3 great men, but 3 elite hockey players.
Yeah.
Was there anything that he did for you guys or set the example or did specifically with you guys? You mentioned your one brother's just naturally gifted, but there had to have been some either tools or something that he instilled in you guys, because not all most siblings don't turn out like that, right? There may be one good athlete. I mean, you have the Manning family or some shit like that, but like you got 3 stud hockey players that come out of one family. What was the difference there?
He created a culture of accountability, man. Like I got cut from a team when I was 12 years old. I was crying my eyes out. And this is just a good analogy for like what he taught us. My mom was being my mom, like, screw the coach, you know, he's an idiot, blah, blah, blah. My dad came home and he said to me, he's like, how many pucks did you shoot this summer? How many sprints did you do? How many push-ups? How many sit-ups? How many squats? And I was 12. I was like, none. I was like, didn't do anything all summer. He's like, what makes you think you should be on the team? Like, you didn't deserve it. You don't deserve it. You didn't earn it. So like that mindset, dude, like completely, like nobody cares, right? Work harder. That was the secret. Like, you know, we all had different levels of talent and we all understood that if we wanted to achieve our goals, it was on us. Nobody was coming to save us. We had to participate in our own rescue. I think that's the number one lesson that all 3 of us share, all 3 of my brothers and I share, that made us successful hockey players. And like you said, all successful in business and all great dads now because of those lessons we learned from him.
Parents listening, that's it. That's it right there. So here's the mistake that I see tons of parents making nowadays. They snowplow for their kids.
Yes.
We've all heard of the helicopter parent. What a lot of people haven't heard of is the snowplow parent. So your mom was trying to snowplow and blame someone else. Your dad came in and said, no, and held you accountable and told you what the real world is like. That's what your dad did. So the real world doesn't give a shit if that coach was wrong or not.
No.
Were you good enough? Did you put in the work to make that team, is what your dad said. So I've had scenarios with my kids, some of their friends or ex-friends, stuff of that nature, and I've watched these parents plow problems out of their kids' way. They go into the parent-teachers conference and says, this kid's being mean to my kid, and it's their fault, and blah, 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 blah. And they don't allow their kids to have a normal childhood and grow up with skills that are allow them to thrive in the real world, because they're plowing all these problems out of their way. Yep. And maybe it's because of their own trauma or their own parents not doing enough, and they think they got to overcompensate, and they're under the guise of they're protecting their kid. You're protecting them from what? You're protecting them from what real world is like, and they're going to be completely incompetent adults.
I think, Josh, everybody that's a leader right now that's trying to hire young people is feeling the pain of a generation of snowplowing parents. I think you hit the nail on the head.
It's crazy to me how many people haven't heard that term. And especially as I have 13, 11, 9, and 7, and some of the things that I've witnessed happen with some of my kids' friends, because we hold our kids accountable. And if one kid comes home and says they were bullied at school, and said, tell me more. Okay. What role did you play in that? Because there's always two sides, right? I'm not blaming the parents. I'm not getting in the parents' faces. I'm not going to the teacher and saying, this kid's doing this. I'm finding out what's real and finding out. I've been in leadership long enough to know there's always two sides of the story, and usually the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yep.
And right, so unless someone's doing something egregious where they put their hand on my child and it's just an argument or someone called a name or whatever it may be, we're going to talk through that and how to handle that like an adult would have to handle it. So it's just so fascinating to me that parents don't get that, and how they're crippling their kids for real life.
Totally.
And so kudos to your dad for coming in when you were 12 and telling you what was real in life and what wasn't.
Yep, 100%.
All right, my man. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. That being said, I do have one final question I ask everyone.
All right.
And this could be on anything we've spoken of or not spoken of. What's an unpopular belief you hold to be true that you think most others would disagree with?
I would say this thing: nobody cares, work harder. I get a lot of shit about this sign when I talk to certain people, and they're like, that's a pretty dark way to look at the world, but that's what I believe. Like, I think it's up to us. We own it. Nobody's coming to save you.
Couldn't agree more. That is what it is. Yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is that why people like challenge that is, yeah, it's not saying that people don't care about you.
Right.
That's not what it's saying.
No.
It's saying they got their own shit to worry about. So at the end of the day, if you're not owning your role, your responsibility, your tasks, all those different things, you just got to work through it, because no one's going to do it for you. No one's going to care enough to step in and live your life for you.
Right on. Right on.
So that's awesome. All right. Where can people follow you? Or if they got some contacts, either they want to work with you as an employer, or they got maybe someone's listening that's ex-military, ex-collegiate athlete that wants to be in your pipeline, how can they find you?
Yeah, our website is www.shiftgroup.io. And I think the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I don't have any of the other socials. The company does, Shift Group HQ. But find me on LinkedIn, JR Butler. I'm a good follow. I bring my candor to the internet on there.
Brings that mass accent and candor to the interwebs.
Yeah,
that's right. I can concur. He's a great follow on LinkedIn. Go follow the man, JR. Hey, thank you for pouring into the Spartan audience today, brother. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Awesome.
All right,
combo.
Spartans, you know what to do. Share this episode far and wide. Remember that good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.
This is Sparta!